Welcome everyone to LearnTech Asia's Women in Learning series. I'm Michelle, the Senior Content Specialist of LearnTech Asia. So thank you very much for joining us here today. Before I dive right into our conversation today with our expert, I would like to just give you a little introduction as to why LearnTech Asia created the Women in Learning Trailblazers for a Better World series. So we have three reasons why we created this series. The first one is that we wanted to establish easy access to learning for women in Asia. Secondly, empower women in Asia to pursue their lifelong learning journey. And thirdly, encourage women in Asia to be their own leaders. So part of our Women in Learning series aims to highlight industries and experts that empower women to pursue their lifelong learning journey and establish easier access to learning for women. This is why LearnTech Asia created this series, and this is why we have a wonderful guest today, Ami Valdemoro, all the way from, I believe she has two residencies, Philippines, and if I'm not mistaken, the US as well. But Ami, would you like to turn on your camera and introduce yourself?
Sure, and thank you. Hello, everyone. Greetings from the US, where I am currently staying. My name is Ami Valdemoro. I am a strategy and alignment coach, and I am based in Manila, Philippines, but also have called the US home.
That's nice. So, okay, so you're tuning in from America. I realized that I forgot to ask you that earlier. And then I was like, oh no, but I'm not too sure where she's coming from, but that's good. It's a bit more organic as well. Yeah, so thank you so much, for joining us today. Maybe we can get started with you sharing who you are and your leadership journey to the audience who may not be very familiar with you.
Sure. So by way of background, I have about 15 years of experience working across all different sectors. When I first started my career, I was working in global public health, helping with cancer prevention in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. When I graduated from college, I knew that I wanted to do work around the world. So I started to be involved with the largest volunteer nonprofit organization in the US and worked across different markets on public health issues. Yep. And then I decided to go to graduate school to learn how to be a better advocate. So I got my master's in public policy from Harvard. And at the time, I used that as a sabbatical to try and figure out what I wanted to do with myself, my next steps. And so I shifted industries, I shifted business models, I shifted regions. I really took the time to explore. And that's how I found myself working in Southeast Asia. I moved to the Philippines after graduate school, and I became involved with a number of nonprofits, but also social enterprises, which at the time were really growing as a business model across the region and certainly in the Philippines. And in the course of doing that work, I met and hired and managed and mentored people who were coming into who they were meant to be. And I found that in addition to doing the management and strategy work that's involved with building nonprofits or building businesses, I really gravitated towards coaching and mentoring these people. So that's kind of where I took a segue from leading organizations from a kind of strategy standpoint to leading them as a coach.
That's nice. It's interesting to hear how you started out with, if I'm not mistaken, public health, and then kind of really pivot your way through to being a coach and a mentor as well for people, for leaders, or future leaders as well. What really inspired you to kind of make that pivot? I know that you say it was, through your experience and all, but was there a specific event or an individual or individuals that really inspired you to become a leadership coach?
So it's interesting. When I first started my career, I was privileged to have a wonderful group of women mentors, both people who I reported directly to, but also people who I worked with in the organization. And one of the things that my mentor told me, a piece of advice that she gave me as a young woman starting off her career, is that I needed to learn how to become my own best advocate. And part of being able to do that is to really understand who I am what I stand for, how I want to show up in the world. And I feel like from that point, 15 plus years ago to today, it's really been a constant process of discovering who I am and becoming that person.
Yeah.
And I know it can be quite challenging and difficult to navigate, especially in your 20s, let's say, but even beyond, in your 30s and beyond. And so that is kind of how it came full circle.
Wow.
In being able to engage with people who are grappling with the same questions, and having done the work myself to kind of unpack a lot of preconceived notions or assumptions or expectations that other people had of me. I really, like, my soul lights up when I do this work.
I like that saying, like your soul lights up. I think that's how you kind of know that you're like in the right field, or like you're doing the right thing. So I like that way, how you kind of described it. You also mentioned that there were or are some challenges that you encountered, while you pursued this career. If you could share some of those challenges and the skills that you developed along the way to help you overcome those challenges.
Sure. I mean, if there has been a challenge, I've probably lived through it. But the ones that I can think of that might be most relevant to this audience are around things like self-doubt, imposter syndrome. I hear a lot about, like, I am in rooms where I was normally the youngest person in the room. I was normally one of only a few females in the room. I was probably one of the only people who came from the region that I came from, right, as a Filipino American. And often it was in those contexts that I thought, somehow I don't belong here. Right? Or it's conditioning that says, coming from your education or your background or your culture, like the company culture or broader culture, that says things like you're too young, you're a woman, you have too Western, like you're too Western or you're too Eastern, right? You're too much of something. And so, like I said before, a lot of the challenges were internal in terms of how do I get past those limiting beliefs or those doubts that I have within myself. Because even before I sit at the table, or even before I raise my hand, or even before I use my voice, I'm already getting in my own way. To say nothing of the kind of broader context that we live in, where there are like external constraints that inhibit or challenge the advancement of young people, of young women in the workplace. So, I think it's part of this work, or my decision to become a coach. I won't say a leader, because I think that leadership is something that you exercise. It's like a muscle that you exercise, and not someone, like, not who you are. I think part of that is to be able to do this work authentically. I needed to do my own work.
Yeah, I think one thing I heard from another expert that we interviewed as well for this series was that they said that the limitation always begins from within. We set the limitations for ourselves. And I think that kind of really rings true to what you're sharing as well, that, even before we step into the room, regardless of what the room would look like, even before we step into the room, we already have self-doubt, we struggle with imposter syndrome, and many of this has to kind of deal with, I guess, our confidence as an individual, as a future leader or a potential leader as well. What are some ways that organizations themselves can do to help working women, who are struggling with these issues today? How can they help prioritize teaching these working women to navigate these issues that they deal with, or these challenges that they deal with?
Well, I think that the past 2 years, for example, has put into sharp relief the need to have these spaces, not just for women, but for anybody who feels like they haven't historically had a voice or a seat at the table. So I think fundamentally that's where you start at the beginning, making sure that everybody understands that there is a space. So creating a space for these conversations to happen, and inviting people to have a seat at the table, and then listening to what they have to say.
Yeah.
So, you know, in a lot of the work that I do as a coach, but also teaching leadership principles, right, with the Center for Racial Leadership and other initiatives is around understanding that it is not a convenient or a comfortable exercise, but it's one that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And it's based on trust, right? We have to
Mm.
create environments where people trust that whatever it is that they say will be held in confidence,
Yeah.
that it will be accounted for, and that people will take action on it.
Yeah.
And without that, you know, you can do a whole bunch of things, technical solutions, if you will, to help women feel like they're included in the workplace, or that
Yeah.
the workplace is designed not just as a place where they go do things, but where they can show up fully as themselves. So things like flex time, working from home. You know, I know a number of companies have thought about things like making, you know, going into the office 3 times a week a thing, as long as you structure that in some way, or offering services for childcare or mental health.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, things like the pandemic have made it clear that physical health is important.
Yeah.
But one of the residual effects that I think we're still navigating is around the mental health implications of having been isolated for 2 years, and what that does. Well, right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's very true. And I think, you know, what you just said, the way you ended that kind of conversation, your answer there really kind of leads to the next question that I have. And it's kind of like the theme for this conversation is to, you know, imagine new approaches and lead with balance and ease. And I wonder if you could maybe just explain a little bit of what we mean by balance, because I know we talk a lot, especially like in the workplace environment, we talk a lot about work-life balance, but in your opinion, what is balance, and how can leaders of an organization, or just organizations themselves, what can they do better to create a more balanced workplace environment?
So it's interesting. It's kind of a misnomer, because I think rather than thinking about balance, I think about integration. Because often when we think about balance, it's like we weigh the opportunity costs of, say, paying attention at work or being present at work versus being present at home, with all of the responsibilities that happen. And again, you know, reflecting on the last 2 years, yes, like the contributions of everyone in their family, from everything from childcare to elderly care to cleaning and stuff. Everybody has contributed more, but the burden of that responsibility has fallen overwhelmingly on women. Right? And so it's not about trying to strike a balance between two things that are going to have different weights depending on where you're at in your life, but about integrating the two parts of you that you want to kind of cultivate. So understanding that you have, let's say, your presence at work, your presence at home, your presence in other communities where you show up, and how to design your time, your energy, and your resources so that you feel like you are showing up in the most authentic way possible in each of these spaces. So you don't feel like you have to have trade-offs.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I think I kind of, it resonates with me. It's not just about kind of like how much you have to put into this particular, maybe like your professional responsibilities, and that equates to like taking time away from your personal responsibilities, but being able to integrate better. You know, you mentioned several things about, you know, creating, maybe introducing like maybe daycare or childcare systems, or, you know, making it available to parents who are at the workplace, or even allowing for working hours, or even like a hybrid kind of style. Maybe if we can kind of like move the conversation a little bit more towards kind of the skills that regardless whether you're at the leadership level, or even if you're at a managerial or executive level, what are some of those skills that we would need to kind of adjust better to this new integrated workplace?
So there are a few. The first one I would say is taking action. So especially if you're coming from a place where you are used to being a high performer, you're used to meeting expectations. Often when you're coming up against, or you're going into your next level of growth,
Yep.
there's a bit of a hesitation in terms of, what if I take action and it doesn't turn out the way I expect? What if it's not perfect, right?
Yeah.
Part of that is that clarity comes from action. So
Yep.
being able to be brave and take action is one. Two is being able to let go of practices, norms, traditions, ways of thinking, being, or doing that no longer serve. Being okay with that and not feeling like you have to be attached to it because it's been a practice that's been ingrained for so long.
Yeah.
Again, I think that this, for all of the kind of turmoil and turbulence that the last 2 years has caused, I think it's a really good time to practice this skill and to realize that you have the opportunity to let things go, and that it can be for the benefit of you and your organization and your teams. The third thing is around kind of being willing to learn lessons and know that it's not going to be perfect every time. I mean, I think, entrepreneurs that I work with, this is kind of the startup mentality that I think is critical for any organization, whether you're, a legacy organization that's been operating for 200 years, or if you're really a startup. Is being able to learn and iterate and have that mindset that things aren't fixed. If it works, we keep it. If it doesn't work, we can let it go. Right? And then really giving ourselves, our teams, compassion not to know everything, right? I think, again, having this approach where you're trying things out, you're experimenting, and it's built on a trust that no matter what it is that you're doing as a team, like fundamentally, that is the biggest thing. That is the foundation for everything.
I find that the answers that you've given, they come full circle, because we start with kind of, building trust in the organization, regardless at whichever level. There's trust, going in and out of that organization. And then from there, we move beyond what we conventionally know and what we conventionally do. This really rings well with a conversation I had with another expert as well, who talked about how we need to be adventurous. We need to be bold enough to step out of our comfort zone. And I think, obviously, the past 2 years have really kind of done that to us. We've been forced out of our comfort zones. We've been forced to rethink and re-strategize the way leaders lead, the way people approach the workplace, the way, especially like for women who are coming back into the workplace, they had to really rethink how they do work and the skills that they need to have to kind of excel in the workplace as well. And all of that, I find the way that you've kind of like put it, it's very full circle in itself. So you have to have trust that everybody will be confident enough and be bold enough to go beyond what they know, so that they can obviously grow together as an individual, but also as an organization. Yeah, I read the piece that you wrote for, and let me share this. It's actually for Center for Asia's latest book, which is titled Rethinking Asia, Volume 8, Women's Leadership Retold, What to Leave Behind, Keep and Build. And I managed to actually read a little bit of your reflective piece, and I like that you started the conversation very boldly. I thought that was something that really captured my attention when reading your piece. And you talked about how, which you mentioned, I think, just at the start of this conversation, that sometimes you feel, or you felt, that you maybe in certain places you were a bit too Western, and in certain places you were too Eastern. And I mean, I grew up Malaysian, and I have not had the opportunity to, I don't have the experience that you have about working in two different places. So maybe if you could just maybe share a little bit more about what you wrote, and how, like, our audience can actually learn from what you actually wrote. Yeah.
Sure. And thank you for taking the time to read it. I'm glad that you found it resonated with you. And so, I mean, going back to our conversation about integration, the piece really focuses on two different approaches to leadership. And without trying to put kind of gendered lens on each approach. It focuses on what I would call a more empathetic type of leadership that focuses on compassion, that focuses on listening, and that focuses on kind of following intuition, versus a more assertive style, which is kind of direct, top-down, linear, right? Kind of aggressive energy and behavior. And I think traditionally, when we talk about leadership, we've thought about it in terms of this assertive style, because that's the style that's been witnessed, that we've seen, that we have examples of, predominantly, let's say, throughout the course of history. But that's not to say that the other type of leadership doesn't exist, or that it's not valid, or that it's not effective. And in addition to that, I think each of us has both an assertive style and an empathetic style of leadership. And it's not about favoring just one over the other, but like I said before, about integrating them and understanding that they're both like tools that you have in your arsenal when you're thinking about exercising leadership. And it's really about understanding, again, who it is that you're trying to lead, where it is that you're trying to lead them, and how they communicate and respond.
I think you really summarized your chapter very well here. I mean, for anybody who's out there, Ami's chapter is worth buying the book, because I really truly resonated. It really sparked an interest, in reading your chapter as well, your reflective piece, and hearing how it really ties in with what we have been talking about as well, integrating the different types of leadership, because I think, having experienced different types of leadership myself, it is true. Of course, there are certain places where maybe some form of leadership is a little bit more dominant. But I think moving forward, even as the workplace moves into a hybrid kind of workplace, I feel like leadership styles need to kind of hybridize and integrate. We want to use the word that you're using, integrate, to be more impactful for the different groups of employees, or the different groups of workforce that people will eventually have in the organization. Maybe just to kind of like final two questions, final two questions to just kind of end this conversation here. The first one is, what does the future of leadership look like for women, either women, young women coming into the workplace, or women returning to the workplace? What does the future of leadership look like in your opinion?
Well, not to put it on the women who are entering the workplace, starting their careers, but I think it's really, I can't think of a more clear opportunity to take a stand on what we want that future to look like. And again, it's not going to be convenient conversations or comfortable conversations in many cases. And I do want to kind of contextualize this within, let's say, Southeast Asia, right? Like I mentioned, and even in the article, if you are in the reflective piece, if you read it, you'll know that I'm the product of two cultures, right? I spent a lot of time in the West, but have spent now almost a decade working in Southeast Asia. And I understand that there are certain dynamics that are a little bit different, certain cultural norms that are a bit different, that might not prize or value directness or openness as much as Western cultures, right? But I think because there's been such a kind of seismic change in the way that we relate to one another, we connect with one another, moving from virtual back into the workplace or some hybrid of that sort, it's really leaving the door open to recreate a situation where everybody feels held, where they feel seen, where they feel understood. And I think, especially because there are norms around, let's say, respecting traditional hierarchy, or deferring to elders, right? Cultural norms that have built our societies and that we value. I think this is an opportunity that might not exist it might exist in the future, but it's a natural segue that is an invitation to people to really take a stand on how they want to work. I mean, the trend, at least in the West, they've been talking about things like the Great Resignation, right? It's
Yeah.
gotten to a point where people are no longer having those conversations because they've realized that whatever environments they were in before are not
Yeah.
working.
Yes.
And that
Yeah,
might not be
that's
the
right.
case for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly is an opportunity to say, I want to be able to work in a place that considers, right, and doesn't just think of it as an afterthought, how I spend my time outside, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's caring for
that's right.
kids, elders,
Mm-hmm.
that I need time. There's also how much time you want to spend physically face to face with people.
Yeah.
That might be a generational thing or a cultural thing, but um, being able to define that
Mm-hmm.
and setting expectations in a way that everybody knows and is clear on if this hybrid system is happening, how
Yeah.
it's going to work, so that
Yeah.
again, there's that trust that no
Yeah.
matter where you are, whether you're in the workplace or
Mm-hmm.
outside of the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
handling other things, that the job gets done.
Yeah, that's right. I I do agree, and seeing, just based on the research that we had to do to create this series, that this seems like the perfect time, or like an idea, maybe not perfect, but a very good opening for women who are either entering the workplace, re-entering, or who are currently in the workplace, to kind of break those kind of conventional norms, and be more confident, get rid of that self-doubt. It's not going to be easy, like you mentioned, because we are always we do struggle with like self-doubt or like imposter syndrome, as you mentioned. But be brave enough to go beyond those comfort zones and really be bold enough to create a new workplace environment, one that integrates, as you mentioned, a our professional and personal responsibilities, one that prioritizes us as individuals, first and foremost. If that's what you want, then that's what you should create in the workplace that you are in or going to be in. Maybe one last question would be, how, in your opinion, how valuable is lifelong learning in this future, or even in this present state that we're in? How important is lifelong learning?
It's essential.
Yeah.
Essential, because if we're in a situation where, things are constantly changing, right? Who knew that in 2019, I think at least in the Philippines, there was already talk of, um, something happening public health wise in
Yeah.
2019. And who would have known that 3 years from now, we would still be kind of having this conversation? I don't know. Maybe there are epidemiologists who knew about this. And there were people who were talking, like Bill
Yeah.
Gates, talking about pandemics and
Yeah.
epidemics a
Mm-hmm.
few years back. But realistically speaking, we didn't know that this was going to happen,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the context that we're living in, where things are constantly changing,
Yeah.
then we can't be operating on the same manual that we use from 10 years back, or even 5 years back, or even
Yeah.
6 months. That's like, kind of taking it to the extreme. But
Yeah.
if we have this culture, or if we're able to
Mm-hmm.
facilitate a culture where we're constantly learning
Yeah.
and growing, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just sticking to the way that things have been done, because that's the way that they've been done since the
Mm-hmm.
dinosaurs roamed the earth, then we're going to be in a better position and
Mm-hmm.
prepared to shift,
Shift.
as
Yeah.
opposed to always being reactive. We
Mm-hmm.
can then start to even think about being proactive and getting in
Yeah.
front of it.
That's right. I read somewhere recently that if the article just started out, the future of work, or just in general, the future is not definitive. That is why, lifelong learning, or just continuous learning in itself, is so valuable, regardless of whatever level that you are in the workplace, or if you're, planning to enter the workplace, that need to actually learn continuously, be open and be bold enough to learn new things, even if it's not within what you are comfortable with, or what you have known previously, or what you think your job is designated for. Be bold enough to really learn. What would you, do you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it takes a great deal of confidence and bravery, as you said, to be able to know that you don't know it all.
Yeah.
And that when you don't know, there's an opportunity to acknowledge that you don't know, but
Yeah.
also an opportunity to learn from it if you're
Yeah.
open to it.
Yeah, okay. Before I end this conversation, do you have any final maybe like words or like, advice for our audience, who are inspired, to pursue their lifelong learning journey, or to create opportunities for other women to pursue their lifelong learning journey?
Sure. So one of the things that I thought about as we were having this conversation is
Mhm.
we're asking people to be bold, we're asking people to be
Yep.
confident. And often, that sounds great, but if I'm sitting in the audience, I'm like, how am I going to do this on my own? Right? It
Mhm.
feels like a lonely enterprise. And so one
Yeah.
of the things that I would say is if you feel like it's too much for you to take on your own, if you're
Mhm.
feeling this way, probably someone else in your organization is also
Yeah.
feeling this way.
Yeah.
And so it's an opportunity to find out and
Mhm.
kind of put yourself in a group of
Yeah.
people, which feels safer in a way
Yeah.
that you don't have to be a lightning rod or do it on your own.
Mhm.
But also, it can give you the confidence and kind of strength in numbers,
Mhm.
especially in, contexts in which we value kind of
Mhm.
collective action.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think for everybody who's thinking about their own kind of growth and development,
Mhm.
there are four kind of areas that you would want to focus on. One is around strategy. So, like having a game
Mhm.
plan of
Mhm.
how you want to go about developing yourself, right? What are the areas that you're interested in, where you might see blind spots, what you want to
Yeah.
focus on. Two is having an awareness of what your baseline is. And that takes time. I mean, like I said, I'm still figuring that part out, right? It's a
Yeah.
constant evolution. I have a better grasp on it now than I did when I was 22, but you're in a constant kind of process of evolving and making sure that you're self-aware around that. The third thing is being able to take responsibility and understand that the choices that you make for how you show up in the world are choices. Right?
Yep.
Often, sometimes we think that we just kind of default into behavior because it's what
Mhm.
we have to do.
Mhm.
But remembering that everything is a choice
Mhm.
is empowering. And the fourth thing is around accountability. So, again, this is where having people around you who share
Mhm.
your values or your vision or who can hold you to account for your growth,
Yeah.
it often helps. Like you can think of, people who have fitness goals, often they have people who are like their workout buddies or people
Yeah.
who help them hold themselves accountable because it's hard to do on your own.
Mhm.
And
That's
so
right.
again, it's not a it is an individual enterprise, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a lonely one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's that last thing that you just said right there is really the reason why we created this series and why we reached out to several experts like yourself to kind of share your experiences and also the lessons that you have learned, because I think regardless, I mean, Asia is obviously a very big continent, but we wanted to show that regardless of where you are from, be it in Asia or outside of Asia, and whatever job that you're in or whatever profession that you're in, all of us do have similar challenges and opportunities, and it's nice to be able to learn from one another. I think to have this kind of like, although virtual, to have this sense of community, because that's something that we tend to overlook, or sometimes we think that we are completely alone, as you mentioned. So it's really good to hear that yes, it is very important to have a good network. And it really is exactly the same thing that Daria, also from Center for Asia Leadership, mentioned just now, when we had our session as well. She was talking about how it's very important to network with similar people, or people who have gone through this similar experiences, because then you don't feel alone, and you will also then have people who can kind of like brainstorm with you on how you can do better for yourself or even for the organization that you're part of. So thank you so much, Ami. Thank you for availing your time. Thank you for sharing all of your insights with me, and also obviously our LearnTech Asia audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.